I don't know when it started. This quiet erosion of meaning, this strange thinning of the world. There was a time when mornings used to carry weight. The sun would rise, and something in me would rise with it, some vague sense of direction, some invisible promise that the day could still matter. But lately, everything feels like surface. Beautiful, yes, but slippery. I watch people move, talk, build, post, plan, and it's all motion without gravity. Everywhere I look, I see purpose written in neon, but when I touch it, it dissolves into light. I try to remember the last time I truly believed in something, not just the performance of belief, the hashtags, the slogans, the causes, but belief itself. That quiet conviction that life, in all its chaos, was still pointing somewhere. It's been a long time. The world feels pointless. And it's not because of tragedy or loss or some dramatic failure. It's because everything now feels equal. Every joy balanced by noise, every truth flattened by 10,000 versions of it. We've built a civilization of infinite mirrors, and somehow we've forgotten what a window feels like. I scroll and scroll through beauty, through suffering, through opinions pretending to be emotions. And somewhere in that constant motion, the pulse of life becomes abstract. I see everything, but I feel nothing. And maybe that's the new tragedy. Not that the world hurts, but that it no longer moves us. That's where Camus finds me. Not in a library, not in a classroom, but in this modern haze, where distraction is the new despair. He doesn't come to comfort. He comes to clarify. He tells me, you feel this way because you're awake? The absurd, he says, is born from this exact collision. The human need for meaning meeting the world's refusal to give it. It's not a malfunction. It's the human condition. The world is silent, and we are full of questions. That gap between our hunger and reality's indifference, that's the wound we keep calling emptiness. I used to think awareness would save me, that if I just understood enough, read enough, grew enough, I'd find the secret pattern. But awareness without acceptance only multiplies the ache. It makes you see how enormous the void is, but not how to live beside it. Camus never promised escape. He said, we must face the absurd without resignation, without appeal, and without illusion. That's the hard part, to live without illusion, to stop asking the universe to make sense and start asking ourselves to stay conscious inside its nonsense. The world feels pointless, yes, but maybe pointless is the wrong word. Maybe it's just uncaptioned, not designed to carry our narrative, not built to flatter our expectations. We wanted a story. Life gave us experience and the space between them. That's where the absurd lives. I think of Sisyphus, not the symbol, but the man. A figure in perpetual motion, condemned to push the same stone up the same hill forever. For centuries, we've looked at him and said, how tragic. But Camus looked at him and said, how human. He imagined Sisyphus happy, not because the stone changed, but because Sisyphus did. Because somewhere along the climb, he stopped asking for the hill to end. He stopped waiting for meaning to arrive like a gift. He started living as though the act of pushing, the act of defiance, was the meaning. When I first read that, I didn't understand it. It sounded romantic, poetic nihilism for philosophers. But now, in this era of constant striving, of endless screens and measurable everything, I see how prophetic it was. Camus saw us coming. He saw a future where humanity would drown in abundance, and still thirst for meaning. He saw a time when we would conquer nature, but not ourselves. When we would have everything and still feel like nothing. And here we are. Our technology has outpaced our souls. Our progress has outrun our peace. We have built machines that know us better than we know ourselves, but they cannot love us and they cannot save us. We have decoded the structure of the universe, but we still haven't learned how to sit alone in a room without fear. So the world feels pointless. But Camus would say, it's always felt that way. You've just stopped pretending otherwise. He would tell me, the absurd is not something to cure, it's something to live with. And the moment you stop fighting it, something unexpected happens. The noise begins to thin and reality starts to breathe again. I used to crave meaning, like oxygen. Now I see the craving itself was the suffocation. When you demand purpose from everything, you stop seeing things as they are. You start seeing them only as tools for your own story. The tree is no longer a tree, it's a metaphor. The person is no longer a person, they're a chapter. Even pain becomes currency in the economy of significance. But when I stop demanding, when I stop asking the world to prove itself, something shifts. The pointless becomes peaceful. The silence stops being hostile and starts being spacious. Meaninglessness turns into freedom. Oh, blank canvas, not a void. Camus called this rebellion, to live without hope of meaning, but without despair either. To live fully aware of futility and still choose to create, to love, to laugh. To make art not because it matters, but because it's beautiful. To help others not because it saves the world, but because it honors the part of us that still cares. That's the rebellion Camus spoke of, not anger, but tenderness in the face of indifference, not faith, but fidelity, loyalty to this fleeting, unreasoning life. When the world feels pointless, I think that's what it's really asking of us, to stop outsourcing meaning, to stop waiting for permission, to realize that the very act of living consciously in a meaningless universe is the purest art form there is. Sometimes, I think the greatest freedom is to say, I don't know why I'm here, but I'm here. To build small rituals around that admission, making coffee, feeding a plant, writing a line, holding someone's hand. Tiny acts of defiance against the great indifference. The gods don't care, but we do. And that difference, that fragile human difference, is everything. I don't think Camus wanted us to be cheerful. He wanted us to be awake, to see clearly without anesthesia, to feel the absurd, to let it break us open, and then to stand up anyway. When the world feels pointless, I remember his words. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. At first, that line sounded cruel, almost mocking. Now it feels like a map. He wasn't saying the struggle is good. He was saying the struggle is real, and realness, in a world of illusion, is sacred. So I keep pushing my stone, my routines, my doubts, my endless attempts to be better, kinder, truer. And maybe that's all life ever was, an invitation to push, to feel, to fall, to rise. When I stop trying to fix the pointlessness, I start seeing its strange beauty. I see how every meaningless moment glows with quiet potential, like sunlight on dust. I see how love, even if it fades, transforms the space it touches. I see how art, even when forgotten, changes the air for a while. These things don't last, but neither do I. And maybe that's why they matter. Camus once wrote, "To live is to keep the absurd alive." That's what I'm trying to do. To live without anesthetic, without false comfort, with eyes open and heart intact. To see the emptiness not as failure, but as invitation. An invitation to create, to connect, to breathe without needing a script. When the world feels pointless, I whisper to myself, it's supposed to. That's the first honest thing it ever told you. And once you accept that, once you stop asking the world to be more than it is, you discover something extraordinary. You discover that life doesn't need a point to be luminous. It just needs your attention. There was a season when I thought I could outrun it. The sense of futility. I tried every disguise, purpose, productivity, reinvention. Each time the same quiet returned. It waits behind applause, behind affection, behind even the good days. A low hum that says, and then what? At first, I thought the question was cynicism. Now, I know it's honesty. The soul keeps asking what the ego is afraid to answer. And then what? After the goal, after the prize, after the next version of me, what remains? Camus would tell me, that question is the start of freedom. When the illusions die, life begins. It's a strange thing to learn that despair can be fertile, that when the scaffolding of meaning collapses, you can finally see the sky. I used to see the world as a map, destinations, paths, checkpoints. Now it feels more like an ocean. No routes, only movement. You don't arrive anywhere. You keep becoming. That should terrify me. It doesn't anymore. It relieves me. Because if life has no fixed meaning, then failure loses its sting. There's nothing to fail at except honesty. I used to think rebellion meant noise, fists, fire, manifestos. But Camus taught me that the loudest rebellion is calm persistence. It's the quiet refusal to lie to yourself, the willingness to keep living without pretending you know why. The world feels pointless, but maybe pointless just means unclaimed. Maybe it's not that meaning is gone, but that it's waiting for us to make it by hand. Every gesture, every act of attention, every choice to keep going, they all leave fingerprints on the blank page. I walk through the city and try to see it as if for the first time. The people rushing, the small collisions of strangers, the sound of laughter spilling from a cafe. The surface chaos hides something tender, the shared fact of endurance. None of us know why we're here, and yet here we are, inventing mornings, paying rent, making plans. We are each other's proof that absurdity is survivable. Sometimes I watch a street performer balancing on a rope, arms outstretched, body trembling against gravity. The crowd holds its breath. For a few seconds, no one is thinking about purpose or deadlines or meaning. We're simply witnessing the miracle of balance. Temporary, fragile, real. That's what existence feels like to me now. A balancing act in the wind. Camus would call that lucidity, the art of living with your eyes open without retreating into false hope. Hope, he said, is not the same as illusion. Hope is what remains after illusion is gone. It took me years to understand the difference. Illusion says, life will make sense if you wait long enough. Hope says, life may never make sense, but you can love it anyway. That's what keeps me breathing now. Not purpose, but participation. The awareness that I'm part of something vast and wordless. The sky doesn't explain itself, yet it keeps changing colors. The sea doesn't justify its motion, yet it keeps returning to shore. Maybe I don't need to justify my living either. Maybe being alive is the justification. When the world feels pointless, I remind myself that pointlessness is just the absence of narrative, not the absence of beauty. The sunset still burns, even if no one writes it down. The rain still cleanses, even if no one prays for it. Existence doesn't depend on comprehension. It simply is. There's a line from Camus I carry with me like a talisman. In the depths of winter, I finally learned that within me there lay an invincible summer. He wasn't talking about optimism. He was talking about endurance. That strange, quiet light that refuses to die even when everything around it goes dark. I've seen that light in people who have lost everything and still managed to smile. I've felt it in myself on nights when I thought I couldn't bear another hour and still, somehow, breathed again. The invincible summer isn't joy. It's defiance. It's the refusal to let the absence of meaning become the absence of life. Sometimes I imagine a conversation with Camus, not the philosopher, but the man. I tell him about our world, about screens that never rest, about people starving for authenticity in a banquet of content. He listens and nods because he saw it coming. He knew that once we stripped the world of gods, we would have to become gods ourselves. And that's a burden no heart can carry for long. He'd tell me, don't try to be infinite. Be faithful, faithful to your limits, to your senses, to the small details that anchor you to reality. The smell of coffee, the sound of someone laughing down the hall, the warmth of light on skin. These are not distractions from philosophy. They are philosophy, embodied, immediate, true. I think we misunderstand what it means to find meaning. We imagine it as a revelation, some thunderclap of understanding that makes sense of it all. But maybe meaning is quieter than that. Maybe it's just the act of noticing something and saying, this matters to me. Meaning doesn't have to be eternal. It just has to be sincere. Camus said, we must imagine Sisyphus happy, but maybe happy was never the right translation. Maybe he meant awake. Sisyphus isn't grinning at the futility of it all. He's present, fully engaged with the weight of his stone, the pull of the hill, the breath in his chest. He's not waiting for freedom. He's living it. I want to live like that, not in search of a grand purpose, but in deep communion with the texture of living itself. When the world feels pointless, I write, not to fix it, but to witness it, to record that I was here, that I saw the dust in the sunlight, that I loved something fleeting. The page becomes my rebellion, my way of saying, even in the void, I choose to speak. It's not about creating meaning for others. It's about staying connected to the pulse of the real. Every word, every note, every photograph, every act of tenderness, these are our small protests against the indifferent stars. We are brief, yes, but we are luminous in our brevity. The world doesn't owe us meaning, but maybe that's what makes it sacred, that everything we cherish, we must create ourselves. Love, art, laughter, compassion, all of them are human inventions against the backdrop of indifference. They are proof that we can build beauty out of nothing, proof that we can care in a universe that doesn't. Sometimes that realization feels like enough. I stand outside at night and look up at the same sky that terrified me as a child. Back then, its vastness made me feel small. Now, it makes me feel included. The stars don't know my name, but I know theirs, and that's enough for me. The act of noticing connects us more deeply than understanding ever could. Maybe that's what Camus was trying to teach, that the goal isn't to solve the mystery, but to fall in love with it, to replace certainty with curiosity and meaning with participation. The world feels pointless, yes, But in that pointlessness, there's an honesty that feels like grace. Because when everything is stripped of reason, what remains is raw existence. The simple, miraculous fact that there is something rather than nothing. And if you can stand in that awareness, even for a moment, the silence becomes almost musical. I used to think philosophy was about answers. Now I think it's about listening. Listening to the silence until you realize it's been speaking all along, just not in words. That's what I would tell anyone who feels the way I do. Don't look for the point. Look for the pulse. The point will always escape you. The pulse never will. There are evenings when the fatigue arrives like fog. It doesn't announce itself. It gathers quietly at the edges of thought. I can still move, still speak, still smile, but something in me drifts a few inches away from everything. The colors mute, the hours flatten, the world feels like a photograph I forgot I took. That's when the old voice returns, the whisper that says, "None of this means anything." And for a moment, I believe it. I look around and see repetition, noise, people chasing the same prizes in slightly different costumes. I feel my heart shrink to a small, cautious rhythm. The void presses close. But then I remember, Camus stood here too. He faced this same quiet gravity and didn't look away. He called it the absurd, not as insult, but as recognition. To name the absurd is to admit what every honest heart already knows, that the world's silence is real, and yet so is our longing. The absurd isn't a wall, it's an intersection. Two forces meeting, the human hunger for clarity and the universe's magnificent indifference. And in that collision, something new is born. Consciousness. I used to think consciousness was a gift. Sometimes it feels more like a responsibility. To see the world clearly, to know there is no grand design, and still choose to care. That's the weight we carry. Camus said that once you recognize the absurd, there are only three options: escape, despair, or revolt. Escape hides in illusions. Despair sinks into silence. Revolt, that's where life begins again. Revolt doesn't fix the absurd. It dances with it. It's waking up each morning and saying, "I know the rules make no sense, but I'll play anyway." It's writing songs for an audience that might never exist. It's planting trees whose shade I'll never sit beneath. It's loving people, knowing they will one day disappear. Every act of rebellion is an act of creation, and creation in a pointless world is sacred. I think about that often when I watch someone doing something entirely unnecessary, painting on a wall, playing music on a corner, baking bread just because it smells good. None of these things will save civilization, but maybe that's not their purpose. Maybe their purpose is to remind us that purpose isn't the point. Meaning isn't discovered, it's made, and making it is enough. Sometimes when the world feels most pointless, I look at people's hands, the way they gesture when they speak, the way they fold into each other for warmth, the way they reach instinctively to help a stranger who has dropped something. Hands don't philosophize. They just act. Maybe that's what Camus meant when he said we must live without appeal, not to think our way out of absurdity, but to act our way through it. The act itself is what redeems the moment, not success, not reward. The act. I've learned to respect small persistence more than grand ambition. Anyone can dream of saving the world. Few can keep showing up for a life that refuses to explain itself. That showing up is the purest rebellion I know. Some nights I walk the empty streets and listen to the rhythm of my own steps. The world feels vast and detached, but also strangely intimate, as if existence itself were whispering, "You don't have to understand me to belong here." That whisper is enough to keep me moving. Camus once wrote that the realization that life is absurd cannot be an end, it must be a beginning. I repeat that to myself when the days blur. The beginning is always right here, in the breath, in the motion, in the next small kindness. I think about his idea of freedom, not freedom from limitation, but freedom within it. Freedom born from accepting the terms of life and still choosing joy. That's a hard kind of joy. It doesn't sparkle. It glows quietly, like embers that refuse to die. When I finally stop asking the world to make sense, I can start asking a better question. What can I give back to it anyway? Not because it deserves it, but because I do. I give my attention because the world runs on attention. I give my tenderness because cruelty is cheap and tenderness costs me something. I give my time because time is the only real currency I own. These offerings don't add up to a grand meaning. They create small pockets of significance, places where existence feels less like an accident and more like an exchange. That's enough. It has to be enough. When I was younger, I thought I'd need to find some towering purpose to anchor me. Now I think the point is to live without anchors, to float, to drift, to trust that movement itself is a kind of belonging. Camus said that happiness and the absurd are children of the same earth. They are inseparable. To be truly alive is to carry both the ache and the wonder in the same heartbeat. So when the world feels pointless, I remind myself, maybe that's the condition for beauty. If everything were guaranteed to matter, nothing would feel precious. It's the uncertainty that makes love daring, that makes art worth the hours, that makes existence shimmer the way it does just before it ends. The world's silence isn't cruelty. It's neutrality, and neutrality gives us room to speak. That's our task, to fill the silence with our own music, to turn the indifference of the universe into a canvas for compassion, to be conscious enough to see the void and kind enough to soften it for one another. There are days I fail, days I close down and call it realism, days when I forget that rebellion isn't victory, it's participation. But then I remember that every second spent noticing is a second reclaimed from nothingness. Awareness is resurrection on a smaller scale. So I keep noticing the tremor of a leaf before it falls, the way laughter can still find me even in the middle of exhaustion, the subtle mercy of strangers. None of these things solve the absurd. They simply coexist with it, and that coexistence is the answer. Camus never said we should love the absurd. He said we should not deny it, because denial shrinks life to something we can manage, and life was never meant to be managed. It was meant to be met with open eyes, open hands, open heart. Sometimes that meeting looks like joy. Sometimes it looks like grief. Both are forms of honesty, and honesty is where meaning hides. The older I get, the less I want to be right, and the more I want to be real. The less I chase happiness, and the more I practice aliveness. Happiness is a mood. Aliveness is a discipline. To be alive is to be constantly remade by what you can't control. To let the absurd polish you into tenderness instead of bitterness. To love without armor, to grieve without drowning, to laugh without forgetting. When the world feels pointless, I go back to the simplest sentence I know. I am still here. Those 4 words contain rebellion, acceptance, and gratitude all at once. They mean, I have seen the absurd and I have stayed. They mean, I have lost illusions and kept compassion. They mean, I am still willing to meet the day. And maybe that's all Camus ever wanted us to say. Night again. The lights outside my window blink like they're struggling to remember why they're shining. I sit in the half-dark, listening to the world breathe through traffic and wind, and I realize how strange it is to still care. After all the disillusionment, after all the noise and fatigue and hollow striving, I still care about the faces I'll never meet, about the mornings I haven't seen, about the fragile, flickering miracle of it all continuing anyway. Camus would call that care a kind of rebellion, because when everything tempts you toward numbness, caring becomes revolutionary. It's not optimism, it's resistance. He said that life is worth living only on the condition that it has no meaning, because then it is free. When I first read that, I thought it was madness. How can something be worth living precisely because it's meaningless? But now I see what he meant. If life came with instructions, if every action were justified by some cosmic ledger, then our freedom would be an illusion. We'd just be actors in a script we didn't write. Meaninglessness is terrifying, but it's also permission to invent, to choose, to make mistakes, and call them art. There's a power in realizing that the universe owes you nothing, because then you owe nothing back except your own authenticity. No one's watching. There's no eternal scoreboard. That's not despair. That's liberation. Because when no one's grading your existence, you can finally live it. I think that's what Camus was trying to tell us. The world doesn't have to be meaningful to be beautiful. It doesn't have to justify itself to be worthy of love. It doesn't have to explain itself to be enough. The same is true of us. We spend our lives trying to earn a reason for being here, through success, through virtue, through approval, when maybe the reason was never something to earn. Maybe it's something to express. Existence isn't an exam, it's a performance. Not a test of worth, but an act of presence. I find comfort in that, in the thought that every human being is an improvisation, that we're all making it up as we go, composing small songs against an infinite silence. Some are tragic, some joyful, all temporary, and yet, together they make the only music that ever mattered. The absurd doesn't destroy meaning. It multiplies it. When there's no single purpose, everything can become one. A walk at midnight, a laugh shared with someone you love, a line of poetry that breaks your heart open for no reason. These are not fragments of a greater truth. They are the truth, small, fleeting, complete. We call the world pointless because we confuse pointlessness with lack of narrative. But what if life isn't a story at all? What if it's a landscape, vast, chaotic, impossible to summarize, but breathtaking when you stop trying to map it? When I stop narrating and start observing, the world starts to glow again, not with significance, but with immediacy. I see how absurdity itself gives birth to tenderness, how futility deepens beauty, how every fleeting thing, a shadow, a laugh, a heartbeat, becomes precious precisely because it ends. Maybe that's the meaning I was missing all along, impermanence. The fact that nothing lasts is what makes everything matter. I remember sitting on a train one afternoon, staring out the window at a blur of gray and green. Everyone around me was lost in their own small silences, headphones, screens, thoughts. For a moment, I felt the whole absurd condition of humanity compressed in that carriage, hundreds of lives moving in parallel, none of us knowing why, all of us pretending we do, and yet there was a strange peace in it. We didn't have to know. We were here. That was enough. That's the secret. Presence is enough. Not purpose, not perfection, just the raw, quiet act of being here while you still can. Camus wrote, "The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion." And I think about that line every time I feel trapped by pointlessness, because freedom isn't escape. It's participation without illusion. It's doing the dishes with awareness. It's smiling at a stranger without reason. It's forgiving yourself for being human. It's choosing to exist on your own terms, not because life guarantees anything, but because you've decided to show up anyway. That, to me, is the ultimate rebellion, the quiet endurance of the lucid heart. The heart that knows it's finite, but keeps loving anyway. The heart that doesn't wait for the world to make sense before opening itself to it. I think of all the people who lived and died under the same indifferent sky, and how they loved, created, suffered, hoped. None of them solved the absurd, none of them escaped it, but they lived. They built cathedrals of feeling in the middle of chaos. That's what humans do best, not understand, but respond. We respond to meaninglessness with meaning, to death with creation, to indifference with compassion. That's our true genius. Not intelligence, not technology, but tenderness. The world feels pointless, yes, but that doesn't make it cruel. It's only cruel when we demand that it explain itself. When we stop demanding, it becomes vast again. And vastness is where freedom lives. I used to think freedom meant control. Now, I think it means surrender, not submission, but trust. Trusting that the act of living is enough. That consciousness itself is a form of participation in the miracle. When I walk under the stars now, I don't ask for answers. I ask for wonder. And the stars deliver wordlessly. They say, "You are here. Isn't that something?" It is. It always was. The older I get, the more I understand why Camus called revolt a kind of love. To rebel against meaninglessness isn't to hate life. It's to embrace it without conditions. It's to say, "I will love you even though you don't make sense. I will stay awake even though it hurts. I will keep creating even though it doesn't last." That's not despair. That's devotion. We're told to look for purpose, but maybe the purpose is simply this: to live so attentively that the days, however empty, begin to shimmer with their own quiet light. Meaning isn't out there. Meaning is the light that leaks out when you stop trying to be perfect. When the world feels pointless, I try to live as if the point were love. Not sentimental love, but the steady, ordinary kind. The one that shows up, forgives, begins again. The kind that doesn't need a reward. Love for the world that doesn't love you back. Love for people who will never understand you. Love for the small, stupid beauty of being alive. That love doesn't fix the absurd, it makes it bearable. I think that's the truest form of wisdom, not finding peace by escaping reality, but by embracing it so fully that even its emptiness feels alive. I used to think enlightenment was about rising above the world. Now I think it's about sinking deeper into it, into the mess, the noise, the heartbreak, the dust, until you touch something pure and unexplainable beneath it all. The soul of life isn't found in meaning. It's found in immediacy, in presence so total that it doesn't ask for interpretation. And when I manage, even for a second, to live that way, to see, to breathe, to simply be, the world no longer feels pointless. It feels sacred precisely because it's unexplainable. Camus once said that we must live to the point of tears. I think he meant we must live so fully, so awake, that the beauty and the pain become indistinguishable, that we cry not from despair but from recognition, that impossible, luminous ache of realizing how fleeting and magnificent everything is. So when I say the world feels pointless, maybe what I really mean is that the story I was told about it has ended. And what remains, this wordless, shimmering reality, is too vast to fit into any point at all. That's the freedom Camus offered, to stop looking for a destination and start walking for the joy of walking, to stop needing the world to have a purpose and start creating your own melody inside it, to stop asking why and start saying yes. Yes to the morning that comes without reason. Yes to the fatigue that reminds me I'm still here. Yes to the laughter that breaks through the numbness. Yes to the absurd, the empty, the infinite. Yes to life in all its impossible glory. And maybe, in that yes, I find what I was searching for all along. Not a reason to live, but a way to live. A life without appeal. A life without illusion. A life of revolt, compassion, and quiet joy. So when the world feels pointless, as it often will, I don't fight it anymore. I breathe into it. I walk through it. I let it remind me that even in meaninglessness, there is movement. Even in silence, there is song. Even in absurdity, there is art. And I, too, am part of that art. A fleeting note in an endless symphony that doesn't need a theme to be beautiful. That's what Camus would tell me, I think. He would look at the horizon, at the indifferent, glittering sea, and say softly, "The world will not give you meaning, but you can give meaning to the world." And then he'd turn away, light a cigarette, and keep walking into the sunlight, smiling, not because he understood life, but because he was finally done demanding that it explain itself. And I would follow quietly into that same light, not certain, not saved, but awake. And that, perhaps, is enough.